The Atlantic Ocean. September 12, 1942. A place where silence means survival, and every ripple could mean death. The Second World War has already swallowed Europe, Africa, and Asia. But far from the battlefields, another war rages, one beneath the waves. For the men of the German Kriegsmarine, the Atlantic was both hunting ground and graveyard. U-boats, wolves of the deep, roamed unseen, cutting off Britain's lifelines. And among them sailed one of the most capable commanders of the war, Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartenstein, captain of U-156. At just 34 years old, Hartenstein had already earned his crew's absolute loyalty. He was disciplined, precise, but, above all, human. He believed in fighting soldiers, not civilians. He believed in honor, even in the most dishonorable of wars. On the night of September 12th, U-156 patrolled roughly 600 miles off the coast of West Africa, near Liberia. The crew's morale was high. They'd been at sea for weeks, hunting Allied shipping. At 8 p.m., the sonar operator picked up a faint contact. Moments later, through the periscope, Hartenstein saw it. A massive silhouette, illuminated by the moonlight. It was the RMS Laconia, a British passenger liner converted into a troop transport. She displaced nearly 20,000 tons, carrying hundreds aboard, soldiers, civilians, and, as Hartenstein would soon discover, something unexpected. Hartenstein gave the order quietly. Zwei torpedoes. Fewer. 2 torpedoes. Fire. A hiss, then silence. Seconds later, 2 white trails sliced through the Black Sea. At 8:07 p.m., both torpedoes struck the Laconia's starboard side. A roar. Steel twisting. Screams. The ocean swallowed her lights in an instant. Aboard the Laconia, panic spread like fire. The ship listed violently. Lifeboats tangled. Captain Rudolph Sharp, a veteran of the First World War, ordered evacuation, but the list made it nearly impossible to launch boats properly. Within minutes, hundreds were in the water, clinging to wreckage, oil slicks burning around them. But this was no ordinary troop ship. Among her passengers were 1,800 Italian prisoners of war, guarded by 160 British soldiers, along with 80 civilians, including women and children. When the Laconia sank beneath the waves, she dragged over 1,000 souls with her. Through the periscope, Hartenstein could see lifeboats, people screaming. The men on U-156 watched quietly. They'd seen this before. Their mission was complete. Normally, they'd leave the survivors behind. But Hartenstein didn't turn away. He saw the chaos, the panic, and then he saw them. Uniforms not British, but Italian. Prisoners of war. Men from an ally nation of Germany. Hartenstein lowered his binoculars. His face hardened. Then he gave an order that no German submarine captain had ever given before. Surface the boat. Prepare to rescue survivors. As U-156 broke the surface, the crew opened hatches and rushed to pull survivors from the sea. They hauled them aboard. Englishmen, Italians, even women. Every inch of the deck filled with shivering, oil-covered bodies. By midnight, over 50 survivors had been rescued. The men shared their water, their food, their blankets. Some German sailors tore their own uniforms to make bandages. By dawn, Hartenstein realized he could not save everyone. Hundreds still floated nearby, some in lifeboats, some clinging to debris. He ordered a large Red Cross flag to be painted on the submarine's deck, a bright crimson cross on white canvas, large enough to be seen from the air. Then, using the boat's long-range radio, he sent a message, not to Berlin, not to his superiors, but to the Allies. If any ship can render assistance to survivors of the Laconia, please do so. Position, 11 degrees north, 26 degrees west. I have picked up survivors and request help. Will not attack any ship approaching the area. He signed it. German submarine U-156, Hartenstein. It was an extraordinary act. A German U-boat commander, breaking radio silence, announcing his position to the enemy, and asking for cooperation to save lives. Even more extraordinary, the Allies answered. From the port of Dakar, French ships of the Vichy Navy, officially neutral, set sail to help. In the meantime, Hartenstein turned U-156 into a floating hospital. For 3 days, they stayed on the surface, towing lifeboats, distributing food, even building makeshift shelters out of canvas. By September 15th, there were over 200 survivors aboard and in tow, men, women, and children. The German crew barely slept. They worked around the clock, lifting, cleaning, and comforting strangers, enemies, with their own hands. In one of the lifeboats, a young British nurse tended to wounded Italians, while a German sailor passed her a water flask. They couldn't speak the same language, but they didn't need to. For a brief moment, the war disappeared. It was just people, united by survival. One of the rescued later wrote, "We were picked up by the enemy, but treated as brothers. I will never forget those men." On the morning of September 16th, the calm was broken by a familiar, menacing sound. Engines. A distant aircraft, approaching fast. Hartenstein looked up. Through his binoculars, he saw the markings. An American B-24 Liberator bomber, part of the U.S. Army Air Forces, flying from Ascension Island. On the deck, the Red Cross flag waved brightly in the wind. The submarine was towing lifeboats full of survivors. Hundreds of faces turned skyward, waving, pleading. Hartenstein ordered signal flares to be launched, white and red. Then he radioed again, broadcasting in English and German. Submarine engaged in rescue operation. Survivors of British ship Laconia. Request you do not attack. He waited. The aircraft circled once, then twice. And then it began to dive. The B-24 opened fire. Bullets tore across the deck. The Red Cross flag fluttered, shredded by gunfire. Lifeboats exploded into splinters. Survivors screamed as the ocean turned red again. Hartenstein's crew rushed to save those they'd already saved. He ordered the lifeboats cut loose. U-156 could no longer remain on the surface. The captain shouted one final command. "Tauchen, dive, dive." In a single moment, mercy had turned to madness. The submarine dove, leaving dozens still clinging to ropes. Some were dragged underwater. Others, left adrift, were never seen again. When U-156 resurfaced hours later, the survivors were scattered. The sea had taken most of them. Hartenstein sent one last message. Attacked by aircraft while engaged in rescue operation. Many survivors lost. Then he turned away, heartbroken, furious, disillusioned. News of the attack reached Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat fleet. The incident shook the entire German Navy. In Berlin, Donitz issued what became known as the Laconia Order. No more rescues. No more help for survivors. From that day on, the Atlantic would grow even darker. In war, mercy is often punished. And yet, for those few days in 1942, on a quiet patch of ocean, humanity surfaced, even among enemies. Werner Hartenstein would continue to serve until March 1943, when his submarine, U-156, was sunk by an American aircraft in the Caribbean. He and his crew were never found. But those who lived to tell the story of the Laconia Incident remembered something greater than victory or defeat. They remembered kindness in the unlikeliest place. When the sea finally calmed, the Atlantic looked almost peaceful again. Only fragments of wood and the cries of the living hinted at the horror that had unfolded. The submarine U-156 now moved slowly among the wreckage, its gray hull streaked with oil. Men clung to ropes. Women wept, children slept from exhaustion. On the deck, the crew worked tirelessly, turning the war machine into a lifeboat. For 3 nights and 3 days, the men of the Kriegsmarine became rescuers. They were soldiers no longer. They were nurses, stretcher-bearers, brothers. The survivors filled every inch of space. Inside the torpedo room, sailors laid out blankets for the most severely wounded. Mostly Italians who had been locked below decks when the Laconia went down. Others huddled under canvas sheets stretched over the deck, trying to hide from the burning sun. Food ran low on the second day. The crew rationed everything: water, bread, even oxygen when the air grew thin below deck. Yet no one complained. One young German sailor, barely 20, wrote later in his diary, "They look at us with fear, then gratitude. I never thought I would hold an English child in my arms, giving him my last biscuit." On that deck, enemies sat side by side. A British officer shared his cigarette with a German mechanic. An Italian prisoner prayed beside a sailor who had torpedoed his ship. For the first time in years, the Atlantic carried peace, fragile, uncertain, but real. Captain Werner Hartenstein moved among them constantly. He checked every lifeboat in tow, counted every head, spoke softly to those in pain. He wasn't smiling. He was too tired for that. But his eyes carried something that few had seen since the war began: compassion. Each transmission Hartenstein sent into the air could mean death. By radioing Allied forces, he revealed his position, breaking every rule of submarine warfare. But he did it anyway. On September 13th, his message was picked up by the Allied headquarters in Freetown and relayed to London. The British Admiralty confirmed. A German submarine was openly requesting cooperation to save survivors of the Laconia. Confusion spread through command rooms. Was it a trap? A trick to lure rescue ships into the open? Or was it genuine? Some officers wanted to respond with torpedoes. Others said, "If he is telling the truth, this man deserves respect." Help came not from London, but from Vichy France, the collaborationist government still controlling parts of Africa. From Dakar and Casablanca, French warships and submarines set out to assist. Hartenstein was told to hold position until they arrived. So he waited, surrounded by lifeboats, under the burning equatorial sun. By September 14th, the floating convoy stretched for nearly 2 miles. U-156 in the center, followed by a line of lifeboats like pearls on a string. From above, it must have looked surreal. The enemy submarine towing the people it had sunk. Someone found an old gramophone below deck. The sailors played a record to calm the children. The tune, a slow waltz, drifted across the waves. An English nurse named Margaret Hayward later recalled, "The Germans treated us as if we were their own. One of them gave me his cap to shield my face from the sun. I can still see him, red hair, freckles, smiling shyly as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to." That night, as stars appeared over the Atlantic, survivors began to sing quietly, first an Italian hymn, then an English lullaby. Voices mingled, fragile but beautiful. Even hardened sailors turned their faces away, pretending not to wipe their eyes. On the evening of September 15th, a coded message arrived from Berlin. It came from Admiral Donitz himself. He confirmed that other U-boats, U-506, U-507, and the Italian submarine Capellini, were on their way to help. Until the French ships arrived, Hartenstein was to coordinate the rescue. It was an extraordinary situation. For submarines from two nations conducting a humanitarian mission in the middle of enemy waters. The irony was not lost on anyone aboard. The men joked that they had become Kriegsmarine lifeguard service. But beneath the humor lay pride, the kind that comes from doing something right, even in the wrong war. Days passed. The ocean tested them all. Sharks circled. The stench of fuel and decay filled the air. Bodies still floated among the lifeboats, reminders of those who hadn't made it. The crew prayed that the French ships would arrive soon. But fate had other plans. On the morning of September 16th, just after sunrise, the lookouts spotted a speck on the horizon, not on the water, but in the sky. At first, they thought it might be a French reconnaissance plane. It wasn't. It was a B-24 Liberator bomber from the U.S. Army Air Forces, flying out of Ascension Island. The pilot, Lieutenant James Harden, was on routine anti-submarine patrol. From his altitude, he saw the long gray shape of a submarine towing lifeboats. He also saw something else, a giant red cross painted on its deck. Harden radioed his base for instructions. The reply was short and deadly clear. Sink the sub. At 11:25 a.m., the bomber began its descent. On the deck, Survivors screamed and waved at the plane. Hartenstein fired red flares, the color for mercy. He even ordered a message in plain English, broadcast over open frequency. Submarine engaged in rescue operation. British survivors on board. Request you do not attack. The B-24 circled once, twice. Then its bomb doors opened. For depth charges fell. The first exploded behind the submarine, the second directly among the lifeboats. Water erupted, splintering wood, throwing men and women into the air. Hartenstein stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe what he saw. Then training took over. Cut the ropes. Dive. Dive. U-156 descended beneath the surface, but the lifeboats still tied to her were dragged down with terrifying speed. Sailors grabbed axes, slicing the lines as screams filled the air. When U-156 resurfaced, the Atlantic had changed again. Where there had been life, now there was only wreckage. Dozens of survivors were gone, some killed by the blast, others lost to the depths. The crew pulled in those they could reach, but the scene was unbearable. Oil and blood spread in thick black ribbons. Even the sky seemed darker. Hartenstein sent one final, desperate message. Attacked by aircraft while rescuing survivors. Many lost. There was no answer. The rescue mission was over. The submarine could no longer stay on the surface. To do so meant certain death. Hartenstein ordered a course north, towards safer waters. The remaining survivors, nearly 100 still alive in lifeboats, were left adrift. 3 days later, French ships Annamite and Gloire found them. Many had died from exposure. Others were delirious, hallucinating, whispering about the German angels who had tried to save them. News of the attack spread quickly, but quietly. Neither side wanted to publicize the incident. The Allies feared embarrassment for attacking a Red Cross-marked rescue. The Germans feared that showing mercy would be seen as weakness. In Berlin, Admiral Donitz summoned his officers. His decision was cold, swift, and absolute. He issued a new directive. No U-boat commander is to attempt rescue of survivors under any circumstances. It became known as the Laconia Order. From that moment on, thousands of Allied sailors would die in the water, unseen, unaided, unheard. The ocean would show no mercy again. For Hartenstein and his men, the experience left scars deeper than any battle. They had risked everything, discipline, secrecy, even their lives, for a simple act of humanity. And in return, they had been punished by both sides. One crewman later wrote, "We learned that mercy is more dangerous than hate." 6 months later, March 8, 1943, U-156 was spotted near Barbados by another American aircraft. Depth charges sent her to the bottom. All hands lost. Werner Hartenstein was 35. He never saw peace return to the world he had tried to honor, even in war. But his act, his defiance of cruelty, survived. Decades later, survivors of the Laconia still spoke his name with quiet respect. History remembers battles, victories, and losses. But sometimes, the true measure of courage is not in taking life, but in trying to save it. In the middle of the Atlantic, beneath a flag of mercy, men who were enemies became human again. And though the ocean claimed them all in time, their story endures, a reminder that even in the darkest war, compassion can rise like sunlight through the storm. Because humanity, once found, cannot be sunk. The sun dipped toward the horizon, staining the Atlantic a deep blood red. The U-156 drifted slowly among the wreckage of the Laconia, its engines idle, her deck crowded with survivors, sailors, passengers, even the very men who had tried to destroy her. The submarine looked nothing like an instrument of war. Red Cross flags fluttered from its railings, white bedsheets tied to poles, the red crosses hastily painted on scraps of canvas. On deck, a child cried softly, an infant rescued from the water by a German sailor. He rocked it gently, whispering something in broken English. It was a scene the war was never meant to witness. Enemies standing side by side under a single flag, bound by humanity, not orders. Captain Werner Hartenstein, the man who had torpedoed the Laconia, moved from one survivor to another, offering water, shouting orders in German and English. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. He had already radioed Berlin, asking permission to rescue survivors. The reply from Admiral Donitz came swiftly. You may render assistance to survivors. Report when done. But Donitz's tone was cautious. In 1942, such mercy was rare. The Atlantic war left little room for compassion. Hartenstein didn't hesitate. He ordered the remaining lifeboats to be tied behind the U-boat, a bizarre convoy of wreckage and humanity moving together through enemy waters. Word spread across the Atlantic. A German U-boat, flying the Red Cross, rescuing hundreds, including women and children. It was unbelievable, yet it was true. Nearby U-boats, U-506, U-507, and the Italian submarine Comandante Capellini, received Hartenstein's signal and changed course. They, too, began rescuing survivors. From the sky, an American B-24 bomber spotted the strange sight. Through his binoculars, the pilot saw the Red Cross flag clearly displayed. He radioed base. Enemy submarine. Engaged in rescue operation. Survivors visible on deck. The reply came from the base commander, Captain Robert C. Richardson III. Sink the sub. The pilot hesitated. Sir, there are civilians on board. The Red Cross. Sink the sub, Lieutenant. No exceptions. Moments later, the bomber banked in Dove. In war, mercy is fragile. In war, even the purest intentions can be mistaken for deceit. Explosions tore through the waves. Water and fire engulfed the lifeboats. Shrapnel ripped through the Red Cross flags. On deck, chaos erupted. Survivors screamed. Sailors dove into the sea once more. Hartenstein screamed orders. Alle runter. Everyone below. But there was no safety below deck. The U-boat rocked violently, alarms blaring. Yet somehow, the submarine held. The bombs missed by meters. The lifeboats were not so lucky. Hundreds who had been saved were lost again. In the aftermath, smoke hung over the sea like a funeral shroud. Bodies floated among the wreckage. The same faces that Hartenstein's men had pulled from the water only hours before. The U-156 could no longer continue the rescue. Radio contact was impossible. Fuel was low. Hartenstein made a choice that would haunt him forever. He cut the ropes to the remaining lifeboats. He shouted to the survivors in English. We must leave. Head west, toward the African coast. Ships are coming. He knew most wouldn't make it. But he couldn't risk another attack. The submarine dove beneath the surface, leaving behind hundreds of desperate voices fading into the waves. The U-156 vanished into the depths, carrying the weight of a tragedy no uniform could justify. For days, lifeboats drifted across the Atlantic. Sharks followed. Thirst claimed many before the sea did. A few were rescued by French ships from Dakar, others by British patrols. Of the 2,700 people aboard the Laconia, only about 1,100 survived. The rest became part of the ocean's silence. But the story of the Laconia Incident didn't end there. When word reached Berlin, Admiral Donitz issued a chilling new order. The Laconia Order. No attempts are to be made at rescuing survivors of enemy ships. All rescue operations are to cease immediately. Survivors are to be left in the sea. It was the death of mercy, and it was born from an act of compassion. Werner Hartenstein never saw peace again. Months later, in March 1943, U-156 was sunk by an American aircraft near Barbados. There were no survivors. The man who had once raised the Red Cross flag over a U-boat now lay somewhere beneath the same Atlantic he had tried to save lives in. The sea remembers. It remembers those who fight, and those who dare to show mercy. The camera drifts over the quiet ocean, empty, endless, indifferent. Only the faint sound of waves remains. In every war, there are moments that defy logic, when an enemy becomes a savior, when compassion is punished, and when history decides what was right.